I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we're going to be looking at the number one pick of my favorite performance of the decade. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about some of my favorite movies of the decade. We have these top 10 lists that are broken down into 3 weeks, with the first video being honorable mentions, including my picks from 10 to 7 on the list. The next video will be my picks from 6 to 2, and then finally a singular video on my favorite rom-com of the decade, my favorite action movie of the decade. And now as we're sort of evolving, we're going to be doing some different types of genres, different types. We talked about top 10 scores last week. This week, of course, top 10 performances. So while not a direct genre, still talking about and celebrating some of my favorite movies of the decade. Now next week, we're going to be looking at the top 10 overlooked / underappreciated movies. I'm not calling it, say, top 10 underrated, but it's essentially the top 10 underrated movies that you may not have seen that definitely should check out. But this week we're going to be talking about my favorite performance of the decade, which is Amy Adams in Arrival.
Now that's a proper introduction.
The process of Matt Damon in The Martian, the hidden struggle of Cate Blanchett and Carol, the tiredness of Oscar Isaac. Really, when I talk about my top one of any list, oftentimes it combines a lot of the other elements of the list. Now, sometimes it's just my personal favorite, but in this case, with Amy Adams' performance, I really do think it's a maximalist performance, that she's so integral to the movie that take her out, and I don't even know what would happen to the actual movie in itself, because her performance is so integral. Now, if you've seen my Connors videos, you know that I'm a big Amy Adams fan. Every chance I get to dominate her, I do. I think she's the best living actor. I think she's had one of the best decades of any actor. And I think Arrival is just a different sort of subset, but I guess one of my favorite subsets in her most leading role kind of a movie. And like I said, I don't think of the movie would be nearly as good. I can't even think of the movie without her, because of how integral her performance is, how integral her character is ultimately to the story, but how she elevates that and how she really makes you seem like I can't envision anyone else. And I think oftentimes that's like a key indicator for a great performance. That there is not one thing left undone in this portrayal of the character, that's a physical element, that there is some of these emotional elements that it's communicated to you but still sort of hidden, and then there's some mystery to the character. And I think that's what I appreciate about the character and Amy Adams' performance as well, is that there's just so much to dive in and to understand, and then once you see the movie and you understand sort of the third act reveal, that gives a different sort of appreciation and perspective on that performance. So there's some unique elements that we can sort of take into the layers of a complexity that performance actually requires, especially after you've seen it the very first time. So she plays Louise Banks, a linguistics expert who is commissioned by the US government to try to decipher these alien language after these aliens have sort of floated down all across the world. She's the American one, and immediately we sort of understand her emotional connection to the film, because in the opening montage we see her and her daughter, and who eventually dies of some sort of cancer, some sort of illness when she's very young. So that's what the moment we sort of see her, is that she's teaching, she's despondent, maybe sort of disillusioned in a way, and sort of just macabre. But then when she is called upon, she takes it as sort of an honor, that she is maybe not the first choice. There seems to be some other people that they've gone with, but she's still clamoring to go, but almost still from a scientific perspective, that she's not totally passionate, I have to have this job. She sort of does this with sort of a cool, calm confidence, and almost a scientific approach, which adds to the believability of her character, and also adds to the relatability of her character, that when we see her, she's clearly interested, but doesn't want to show that too much. It's sort of this confidence that she portrays, even though there's still incredible nervousness. She still wants to portray this as a sort of cool-headed, level-headed scientist, because she's almost trying to portray and trying to understand what Forrest Whitaker's character and sort of the other U.S. Army generals want out of something like this. So having this sort of scientifical, cold, and sometimes approach to this, on one hand, it's understandable, because we understand in the opening montage the consequences that occur to her with her daughter dying, the emotional toll that's on her. So we understand that from just an emotional core where this person is, just in this great sort of opening montage. And then when she sort of gets called upon, she has sort of this coolness, but still, what's great about Amy Adams' performance is that it's communicated to her that she is nervous, that she is totally not maybe confident who could be in this sort of alien, unexpected situation. There's no right way to go about this, yet she sort of portrays this sort of confidence, and that's great, is that she has this sort of movie star charisma that you just want to look at her and see where she and follow her and what she does next, but also has that sort of Kate Blanchett element of communicating to the audience what she's feeling, what she's thinking, while saying something else. So the audience understands the relationship, even despite of what she's sort of portraying off to some of her other characters, Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker, those guys in the movie. Then this is ultimately a process movie. Once we get into the process of trying to decode this language, it becomes montage, it becomes work, it becomes training, and ultimately when she's thrown into this world, she has some more of the vulnerability start to come out, but also more of the tiredness and sort of the physical toll. That on one hand, this is very much an emotional performance in terms of the face acting and sort of that element, and of course the dialogue. But the physical element, especially Denis Villeneuve, the director, does a great job as well, sort of highlighting these moments where she is tired, where she's just sitting on the edge of the bed, the way she walks. I mean, there are these moments where we see her visibly broken down and tired, and Amy is able to portray that and communicate that through the character. But then there's all these moments of sort of spurts of passion, and just, especially the very first half, just because there is no alien language, there's no communication, she has to do everything through body language, through telling, just small sort of gestures, being slow when she's approaching her hand, of course, against that wall when she takes off the suit, and just the way she walks around even when she's thinking and processing. There's these small things where, because the movie's so focused on language, she, as the central character of Louise Banks, has to be able to communicate to the audience everything that she's feeling, but also the sort of feelings that maybe we have, but the audience, as we're scared, or anyone else seeing this aliens for the first time, we don't know what they're going to look like. She communicates that and communicates the trust that is able to bring this sort of maybe empathetic element that she adds, while also, in one hand, being true to her character, but also being true to the audience. And for a movie, like I said, it's so much about language, the body language in the first half, with that lack of communication in terms of verbal communication, she's able to express that through based on her body and some of her gestures, which is really incredible. And like I said, I think that she's so integral to the movie because so much of her character has to do with performance that ultimately tells the story what to do, in a way where a lot of, say, Hitchcock movies or mystery movies, directors succeed when the audience member is able to figure it out before, say, the detective, and they go, oh, I see, and then as soon as the audience member figures it out, say the detective figures it out, and you feel smarter because you're puzzling it together the same way the detective is. You're not necessarily told, but you actually actively think of it yourself. And I think a similar thing happens here, that oftentimes, because we're just seeing her think and process and do the math, she's able, just through her face without any words, to communicate to the audience, oh, I figured something out. And then when she makes a breakthrough, when she figures something out, we as an audience member go, oh, okay, she figured something out, and then when she communicates that, we already know that. So it has this similar sort of effect where we as an audience member are able to get ahead of the story and know where it's going, and therefore become more engaged. That in a way, her character, but the onus ultimately is on Amy Adams and her performance, is her ability has to communicate to the audience what the story is, and to give that sort of sense of feeling, that if it didn't have that, I think it would be less of a movie, it would be less tense. So that's just one way where her performance, where you understand she's put something together that therefore triggers you to put it together, and therefore it propels a story. So she's so integral, even just in terms of the pace of the movie. But then I talked about the tiredness and the pressure that she expressed, especially in the second half, through her physical gestures. Well, when we see her sort of get more frustrated and despondent, that therefore foreshadows or foretells the communications being lost between the countries. That right now they're all working together in terms of unity, but of course there's going to be some sort of friction and tension, and we see that in a scene before communicated to us through Amy Adams' character, through what she's able to do. That because she's so tired and because she's kind of frustrated in herself, and then the next scene we see the countries themselves sort of having frustrations and communications lost and confusion and anger. Once again, this is another scenario where she sort of tells the plot, because we have these moments where it becomes an internal thing with Amy Adams and then it becomes an external thing, and we get this scale. This is a global thing, that even though we're following her and we're trying to figure out this math problem, there's always these moments of larger scale elements. That is once an internal story and an intimate story, but also about aliens and sci-fi and sort of on a grandiose scale. So in this sense, her performance is actually guiding the tone and the atmosphere. Why we see her being tense and stressed out, and in the next scene, all the different countries are tense and stressed out. Not only is she propelling the story, in this case, she's actually adding to the atmosphere of what the audience member is trying to feel like. In a way, so putting us in Louise's shoes, because we're in this sort of environment in terms of the stressful time, and we don't know what's going to happen, and there's conflicting messages. And I like her demeanor, that it's a different type of movie star role than, say, Matt Damon in The Martian, where it's similar in the sense that she's processing and thinking, and she's a movie star charisma because she has that ability to just, we want to watch her think and figure things out. And she's able to communicate her thoughts without saying anything. It's an incredible talent that she has in this movie. But also, I think that her demeanor is different in that it's softer, it's quieter, and it's never meant to put it down. That's just her type of person. That's her way of going at things. That's not to say she's going to have this big speech and yell and stand for what she believes in. She stands for what she believes in, but does it in more a calm situation, almost a scientific, is how I always interpreted it. Or even you can say, especially with that opening montage, a motherly sort of an aspect, a stern, yes, but very clear, communicative, and ultimately warm, kind of compromised ability. So she never shies away or tries to become sort of a masculine type figure. She uses the character and her strength, and strengths, which is never to be grand and upright, but to be sort of smaller and more fierce in that element. She's able to do that and really add that to be Louise's character and make her almost stand out, the same way Vito Corleone stands out because he never raises her voice. She does a similar thing, that she's passionate, yes, but that doesn't mean she's going to go off the rails and have these large screaming matches. That's just not her character, and Amy's able to bring the confidence and the draw that type of person brings to the character. She's able to bring that out of the character and communicate that to the audience, which is in a lot of ways what the performance is able to do, and great performances too, is they take the great character, they communicate it, and add on top of that, and like every element, the physical element, the telling, implementing into the story, the sort of emotional core with that motherly aspect where we just immediately understand where she's coming from, and that sort of influences the entire movie. And then once again the third act reveal happens, it gives us a totally new perspective, which if you've seen, you know what I mean, but if you haven't, I don't want to spoil it, because Arrival is one of the best movies of the decade. I'm a huge fan of Arrival, and so if Arrival is one of my favorite movies of the decade, Amy Adams is so central to Arrival. She has to be one of the best performances of the decade. So while actually I'm a huge Amy Adams fan, I could have gone with American Hustle or Her or what have you, but I ultimately went here with Arrival because she is stunning, because she is the movie, and because she's able to, on one hand, keep the element of mysteriousness, but still communicate the internal struggle to the audience, making her relatable, making her add to the logical sense of the movie, but also the emotional core of the movie. She is the emotional core of the movie, and she knocks it out of the park in this movie. Arrival, check it out if you haven't, and watch it again just for Amy Adams' performance. And if you like some other Amy Adams movies, tell me in the comments down below. Would have you have gone with something like The Master? I talked about Phyllis Seymour Hoffman last week's episode. Would you have gone with her performance here? Do you really like her in The Muppets? I do. That was a family film I loved. So there's so many great performances in her this decade. I think she has a great career ahead of her. Hopefully an Oscar one day, maybe this year. Hillbilly Elegy, we'll see. But I'm excited nonetheless. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to stay tuned next week, which is the top 10 overlooked / underappreciated movies. That's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.